reflecting on how the Synod for the Amazon followed directly from the encyclical Laudato Si, and how we can apply that dialogue in Canada. Sister Linda will then highlight the work that has been done by women religious in Canada for decades in moving towards an ecological conversion and sustainable future. It is our hope that you will find motivation and inspiration to plan actions of your own this fall in the season of creation from September 1st to October 4th. Finally, we will ask you at the end to participate in 2 petitions that will help move our Canadian leaders to enact policies to transition our society to a more just, equitable, and healthy world that we want to help build together. There'll be time for questions, as Lucy said, after our speakers, but you must place your questions in the chat box. A link to this webinar and the recording of it, as well as a PDF of the resources mentioned in the webinar, will be sent to you afterwards. Now, every GCCM Canada meeting and event begins with a traditional land acknowledgement and a prayer. So I'll start with the land acknowledgement from my place of work. As a community, we have the responsibility to honor, care for, and respect all that Creator God gives to provide us with life. This includes the land, water, air, fire, animals, plants, and our ancestors. As a settler, I am grateful for the opportunity to live and work here, and I thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, who have been stewards of this place for thousands of years. I respectfully acknowledge that I am on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. Here, near Caledonia, Ontario, I acknowledge Treaty 4, the Haldimand Proclamation of 1784, where land 10 kilometers on both sides of the Grand River, from its mouth to its source, was set aside for use of the Six Nations, which them and their posterity are to enjoy forever. Today, people of Six Nations have use of less than 5% of that promised land. And if you'd like to join me in a prayer on the next slide. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. A prayer for our earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. Pour out upon us the power of your love that we may protect life and beauty. Bring healing to our lives that we may protect the world and not prey on it. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. Encourage us in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen.
Amen.
In the Son of the Holy Spirit, amen. And I'll take just a brief minute to introduce our 2 speakers. Sister Priscilla Solomon is an Ojibwe woman of the Anishinaabe Nation and is Sister of St. Joseph's in Canada from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. As the coordinator of the Faith and Justice Ministry in her congregation, with special attention to ecological justice, Indigenous rights, and the right relations, she has recently focused on healing and reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and settler peoples in Canada. She also worked with Sister Eva Solomon in the Western Assembly of Catholic Bishops Building Bridges program, which is focused on Indigenous inculturation and interculturation of faith. As the Synod of Bishops for the Amazon heard pleas to defend the rights of the region's Indigenous people and of the land they hold sacred, Indigenous and church leaders from Canada and the United States went to Rome to support them. Sister Priscilla Solomon was among the Jesuit-sponsored delegation to the simultaneous Tienda de la Casa Común Symposium. Sister Linda's roots are on the west coast of Canada, where a deep love of God's creation was nurtured in her. She brings to her ministry a market gardening and farming background from Saanich, a rural area of Victoria, British Columbia. Through her years with the Congregation of Sisters of St. Joseph's in Canada, she has served in parish ministry, university, and hospital chaplaincy, and as co-administrator of the Catholic parish of the Shiging First Nation on Manitoulin Island. Today, she coordinates an 80-plot organic community garden on the site of Villa St. Joseph in Cobourg, Ontario, along with an extensive sisters organic garden. She ministers as an experienced retreat director, spiritual director, and as an organic master gardener. Sister Linda has a Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Studies from Trent University in Peterborough, and both a Master of Divinity and a Doctorate of Ministry in Eco-Theology from Toronto School of Theology at the University of Toronto, where she is now a part-time faculty member. And now, I would like to pass the microphone over to Sister Priscilla.
Thank you. Bojo ani Indishnikas Ogimakwe and Dodam Makwa Wawashkesh. Hi everyone, my spirit name is Ogimakwe. I'm of the Makwa, the Bear tribe, and my mother is of the Deer tribe, the Deer clan, Bear clan and Deer clan. And I live in the traditional territory of the Nipissing First Nations Anishinaabe, and this territory is within the Robinson-Huron Treaty. And I'd like to begin this webinar is on eco-leaders, but I'd like to acknowledge that women religious in Canada historically have heard the cry of the poor. And since the 1970s and 80s, many of us have engaged with the work of Thomas Berry and work around the new cosmology, and some among us have led us along the way in hearing the cry of the earth, though we don't necessarily know everybody by name, but they are among us. And with Laudato Si, we're all called to hear the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth as one cry. So I'd like to start by sharing with you how I connect the three documents. I see Laudato Si as the prophetic vision. Its prophets denounce and announce and proclaim. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis denounces current destructive lifestyles, economics, social and political structures, and processes that harm and destroy the environment and its most vulnerable inhabitants. He announces the good that exists also in some of our technologies and scientific and societal advances. He announces the good news of hope for transformation, the need for conversion, and the life-giving alternative that Indigenous peoples have lived for millennia and are willing to share. He proclaims the good news that God loves this earth and earthlings, all of God's creation, that God sent his Son among us, and he calls us to incarnate his presence in our time and in our place. His vision and his purpose is to initiate dialogue with all people of goodwill all over the earth, intergenerationally, to protect our common home. I see the final document of the Synod and also its preparatory work as a concrete, localized expression of this vision. It's applied to the Amazonian biome and the inhabitants of that biome, every species of that biome. It's a strong and clear expression of the voices of Amazonians. In that document, they speak for themselves. 84,000 of them were involved, and more were involved in the preparation of the document of the Synod. So they name in that document their tremendous problems that they face because of extractive industries and a globalized economic and a globalized political structures that are set up for profit. And that document also presents new paths for the church, new ways of being church, and hearing both the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. It indicates that dialogue is essential, and it's especially dialogue with Indigenous peoples, whose wisdom, knowledge, and values have enabled them to interact and coexist with life in this biome for millennia. And I see Querida Amazonia as Pope Francis' stamp of approval on the work of the Synod and an expression of support for the ongoing work of transformation. He presents love for Amazonia as its motivating force. And in doing so, he offers a model for the rest of us in other biomes. He speaks of 4 dreams of conversions: social, cultural, ecological, and ecclesial, and of the new paths that are charismatic, enculturated, and ministerially transformed, paths that are dialogical and communal with a face that is fully Amazonian. And of course, this understanding of the 3, how the 3 link, it's an oversimplification perhaps, but for me it does communicate how to link them. And I would like to share with you some connections that I've made. First of all, with the, out of the Tienda la Casa Comun, some of what I witnessed there, and connections with Canada. And so I would like to begin with this first slide. It's, you see the picture of the gentleman there. And when I first saw that, I thought, it seems commercial or kind of superficial. But as I looked at it and thought about it, I thought, but the message is, I love Amazonia. And that's Pope Francis' message. He speaks of beloved Amazonia. It's when we love that we come to know. And when we come to know, we come to love even more and to care for. So we need to love Amazonia. We also need to love our own biome. And I won't read everything, but you can skim through it and you'll see it later. You'll have access to this presentation again. So in the second slide, I wanted to share the symbols that I saw. And one of the key messages of that Tienda la Casa Comun was the message that people have died and are dying. They're giving their lives for the protection of the water and the land in Amazonia. So these symbols of martyrs, Dorothy Stang is there, among others. You see a boat, typical of the Amazon, and in front of it, a lot of the symbols of life there. 2 images of Pachamama, the pregnant Mother Earth. And this struck me very much as important symbols. What are the symbols in our areas? I didn't like the next slide, please. This 2 banners here, I saw several times, and they were displayed quite intentionally in each place that we gathered. And on the banners, it says, everything is connected. What struck me is this woman is nursing a child at one breast and nursing an animal at the other. And I asked about that. The person that I asked said, in the Amazon, when an animal is killed for the life of the people to feed someone, if that animal has young, they recognize their responsibility to care for the young so that that species will continue among them. They will have life for the future and will give life for the future. So they have the practice of, if such an animal is killed, the young is taken and nurtured by the mother along with her child or children until it's able to be on its own. Very powerful message of interconnection and of reciprocity as well. Next one. We had, as part of the Tienda la Casa Comun, the Way of the Cross, and it highlighted the martyrs, and it highlighted as well the presence of so many different people in the Amazon who are working to care for the land and for the water, particularly for the whole biome. Scattered around is are the pictures of the martyrs and a fishing net with a boat above it. And a message about the original peoples that comes from Carita Amazonia. The next slide, please. I chose this one because in Carita Amazonia, Pope Francis speaks about the equilibrium of the planet depending on the Amazon, and recognizing that we too need to love it. So we too can be grateful for the lives of men and women who have died protecting the Amazon. At each station of the cross, after we prayed, someone was asked by the representative of the group that was praying to put a symbol up of what is significant to them, to their people, and also to put up a picture of a martyr. And we were invited as a North American delegation to participate, and we wanted to use a symbol that spoke to our reality of people among us who are giving their lives to protect the earth, particularly the Indigenous people who have suffered, who love the earth and who have suffered for protecting it, and often have been ignored for protecting it. So we used the medicine wheel as our symbol. The next slide, please. So some of the issues that I connected between what is said in relation to the issues in Amazonia and here in Canada. In the final document, that's what FD stands for, the final document of the Synod, paragraph 10, speaks of the appropriation and privatization of natural goods, for example, water. And in Canada, we know we have had many years of work on the issue of bottled water and of people selling bottled water, depleting the aquifers. And at the same time, we're hearing of boiled water advisories in Indigenous communities. We know that some municipal water and sanitation systems are struggling to remain public and to provide service and provide affordable service. We also know that many Indigenous communities lack the infrastructure for sanitation and drinking water systems. Part of the infrastructure might have been put in, but they don't have the finances to maintain it. The next slide, please. In number 10, we also hear about unsustainable mega projects, specifically and particularly mining and oil projects. We hear about pollution caused by extractive industries and the pollution of city garbage dumps and the issue of climate change. So in Canada, we see damage done to the land and the rivers. And I think about the Athabasca River around Fort McMurray and how much damage has been done in that area to the forest, to the elimination of forest land in order to produce space for the industries. And we hear about earthquakes around fracking sites. Certainly we're losing boreal forest, our carbon sink, because of the construction to give access to those sites. And we know that we've had changes in legislation reducing environmental protections in order for those unsustainable mega projects to be able to be authorized or given the right to act. And we've learned that our government is prioritizing oil and gas over the health and safety of local people because they have not responded to the request to close down the camps connected with mining and oil industry in the north and in the west. We hear of more cancer in humans around those sites and more cancerous fish in the rivers, and it's due to the toxins in the rivers. More intense forest fires, pine beetle destruction, and greater extremes in weather, and a much more erratic jet stream, which does affect, and it comes from the climate change impact. Next slide, please. The next slide. Thanks. Another issue in number 13, displacement of Indigenous peoples and territorial intrusion. It's a major issue in Brazil and in the other Amazonian countries because many of the Indigenous territories have not even been designated as Indigenous or acknowledged as Indigenous territory. And where there are voluntarily isolated people, there's intrusion into their territories by industry. We speak of the feminization of migration from the outlying areas into the cities, and the thousands of women that are made vulnerable to human trafficking. So here in Canada, statistics are clear that there are more Indigenous peoples in cities in Canada than on the reserves, but it's also clear that in the cities, they have inadequate housing, poor economic situations, marginalization, racism, violence, and unemployment. All of those issues remain.
Sister
And
Priscilla,
in the feminization,
Sister Priscilla, 5 minutes.
oh my gosh, wow. Okay, do you want to give me the next screen?
Sure.
Thank you. It goes so fast. Whole communities criminalized, leaders criminalized. In Canada, I won't say it, just read through that list. 95, 90, 95, 2019. A comment, a new approach of governments in 2019. Two things. We became aware of the conflict that is created within Indigenous communities between our traditional governance structures that we are trying to reclaim and that are important. Many have not even let go of or lost. That conflict between that and the system that it's set up by a colonial government. And so how do our people resolve for themselves how to negotiate that and negotiate with the broader society as well? And the government has shifted its approach in that particular situation, dialoguing with traditional elders. The next slide, please. I included this. It's the mega projects. Even though it's green energy, mega projects can be very destructive, particularly to the land and to the environment, to the rest of the fauna and flora that are there, and to the Indigenous peoples that are there. So we need also to process how do we do green energy, but we do also need to shift to that. The next slide, please. And this I wanted to share with you a teaching from an elder that I heard quite a long time ago. And that elder said that Creator gave different gifts to each of the 4 symbolic colors of the human race. And I'll share with you this, that he said, to the red-skinned race, the Indigenous peoples, Creator gave the gift of spirituality. And the gift of spirituality doesn't mean that no one else has it. It means that it's something that is core to the spirituality or the way of being of that particular symbolic color of the human race. Spirituality, we recognize the spirit world, and that brings unity. The spirit brings unity and helps us to make those connections with all of creation. So our worldview is a unifying one that sees the web of life. For the white-skinned people, Creator gave the gift of being able to separate and distinguish. That's a gift. And that gift has enabled particularly our scientific world to move forward. It has enabled a lot of analysis. But what the elder said is that we have been given these gifts not just for ourselves, but to share with others, to learn from each other. And I found affirmation of that in the final document, and I'll share with you that quote. The last slide is from the document. The pattern of thinking of Indigenous peoples offers an integrated vision of reality, capable of understanding the multiple connections existing through creation, and it contrasts with the dominant current Western thought. It tends to fragment reality in order to understand it, but then fails to articulate the relationships. And so we're called to work together to support each other and for the rest of the world to hear the gift that Indigenous peoples offer. Okay, I just lost the last slide, please. I wanted to share this one with you because it's the same boat that was carried throughout the Way of the Cross. For the 15th station, what the Amazonian people did is painted the face of this young woman, put her headband on her, and put her in the canoe and lifted her up, a promise of new life, a world pregnant with hope, because people are responding to that call of Pope Francis. So thank you. And the next, I think there's, I'm not going to say anything more because I'm cutting into Linda's time, I think.
Okay. This slide here will also be available to everyone. It is some resources that Sister Priscilla has provided that we could look into to learn more about some of the things that she told us about. And Sister Priscilla, thank you so much for that beautiful image of hope at the very last slide. It was wonderful. Linda,
Yes.
you're up.
I really don't need the slides at this point, but you can keep them up if you want. I'm delighted to be here with you all today and to be presenting with Sister Priscilla, a good friend and someone whom I have worked with over many years often. A sincere miigwech to Priscilla for her insightful, factual, and heartfelt presentation. I begin with the traditional land acknowledgement of where Villa St. Joseph Ecology and Spirituality Center is located. We are on the traditional lands of the Michi-Segig Anishinaabeg, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. These nations are recognized as the caregivers of these lands and water. This territory is also covered by the Williams Treaty of 1925. And I would hold up for you the sacred medicines of sweetgrass, tobacco, sage, and cedar that we hold and keep sacred by our altar in our chapel. We honor the sacred medicines and the teachings of the Indigenous peoples. We are honored to learn from them. I believe that our ministry as women is a focus in relationship, healing, and reconciliation. And I think that I believe that is why Pope Francis wanted to highlight the ministry of women eco-leaders. There is a saying that I rely on. As we heal the earth, we heal each other. We are earth. And to begin, I'd like to share a story that illustrates that. In the beginning years of our community garden here, we had a group come with developmentally challenged young people. And as they were starting in June, which was late, I ran around and got some plants out of various nurseries that were just closing down. And some of them were some very tall, spindly tomatoes. Now, each of the young people had a task to do and somebody to do with it. But there was one little girl, Sarah, that was standing to one side. And I said, wouldn't you come and help the tomatoes with me? And she said, I don't think so. People tell me that I break things. Well, I said, I think we could do it together. And eventually she agreed. So we dug a hole in a trench and because tomatoes root wherever their stem is buried. And you know, when we finished, she was gently patting the earth, and we got it up so it staked, and she just smiled broadly. And during the summer, she kept coming with her group to water and care for it. And near the end of the summer, I heard this call, Sister Linda, Sister Linda. And I saw her running toward me with a basket of tomatoes. How precious are those relationships? And they are nurtured in the earth, and they're nurtured in our hearts. They belong together. And I am going to, in what I share briefly here, is to outline the journey of how we begin and how we keep ourselves journeying on the path of being eco speakers, eco leaders, and proceeding with and the caring and healing, the bridging of our traditions with the earth, the renewing and the refinding, because a lot of it is refinding what is there in our faith story. And there are 4 things that I would suggest and briefly share on. 1 is being true to the passion in your heart and not letting that die or be stamped out. 2, develop support and networks. You will need that deeply. Many times I have turned to my support and networks. And 3 is education. We need to educate ourselves in a new way, in earth literacy and understanding how our faith is a part of who we are, and it was never meant to be separated. And the 4th is contemplative prayer. When I was a young novice, I remember getting a talk on justice people and people who work for justice and how easily they go into burnout. And the brother who was leading the discussion said, we have to realize that it's not us doing it, it's God's work. And we need to take time to be grounded in prayer because it's God's work. So these are the 4 areas that I would like to share with you. Begin being true to the passion of your call. And I just will briefly go over the evolution of the ministry here at Villa St. Joseph. When I came here in '94, it was a retreat center. It had already evolved from being an orphanage and having many young people, babies, whatever, until the 50s. And at that time, there was a large vegetable garden and 2 cows and chickens. When I came, then it became a retreat center gradually. It was only for religious at the beginning, then it was for all Catholic lay people, and then the horizon kept growing into an ecumenical thrust, and as I was arriving, we were moving into an interfaith. But the earth didn't have a clear focus in the ministry at all. There was no gardens left, they'd all been grassed over. It takes time for an evolution to occur. And one of the things that I learned that I needed to be patient with the sisters, and I also needed to have a certain degree of humility. It didn't come easily, and I made many mistakes, but the evolution was there. And that forward evolution of the love of God that's embodied in our ministries, wherever we are, carried us. It is important to know that these things can happen over time, but there is joy when we suddenly realize what we can do together. When we began, our retreat center was only for people. It was human-centered. And when I tried to put some of the ecological programs, and particularly the community garden in our brochure, it was not possible. Now, of course, we have become an ecology and spirituality center. The second point that I'd like to talk about is support networks and friendships. And many times that I have almost been too discouraged to go on, but there was one thing that happened in the 90s. Several of us in the Sisters of St. Joseph met on a retreat and decided to form an ecology committee through our Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And that was a turning point for all of us, because as we are isolated, it is not easy to keep the energy focused to keep going forward. And when we came together, and Priscilla was a part of that beginning, we began to be energized, and we started to see new possibilities of how we could framework, how we could do the bridging, how we could do the healing together. And that has evolved over the years, and we often turn to each other for support, for wisdom, and for challenge. The third that I would like to talk about is the educational grounding. When I first began in ecology work, I was often criticized for being New Age. I had a talk I was giving for people up north somewhere. It was a big gathering, and it was very well received. And I had a lady who came up to me and said, "Well, I really like what you talk about, you know, nature and stuff, but I can't worship flowers like you do." And I was thinking, I'm not talking about worshiping flowers, but it also realized that that was the same criticism. As I work with people in Michigan, Manitoulin, I realized that that criticism had been leveled against our Indigenous peoples, because they do acknowledge the gift of creation. They do acknowledge that a tree has a being. And when I went first to gather cedar, because that's where we would gather in an Indigenous community for Easter, I had to have a prayer. The elder that took me, I had to pray and leave tobacco before we could cut the cedar. What the Indigenous people were criticized for was worshiping a tree. And they totally did not have that understanding. And so we needed culturally to come to a new awareness as white people. And we are on that process. It takes time. The work of ecology at the beginning was New Age. I got criticism for not being involved in justice. Why wasn't I worried as a religious about the poor, about those who didn't have enough food, about the systems of our government? Yes, I was worried, but I knew somehow they were connected. And gradually over time, that connection became very clear. Even Leonardo Boff, the liberation theologian at first, agreed that ecology was just a first world kind of hobby, and it wasn't significant. In a later book, Leonardo Boff turned right around and illustrated how the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are one. And this is where the Indigenous people, where women are often the ones who suffer the most. When I went to my studies, see, the thing in religious communities, you need permission. So I went to my Federation Ecology Committee and said, I have an MDiv, I really feel called to go in to do a doctoral work. Do you think this will be worthwhile for the work we're doing? And they agreed. I then worked in with my local community, and they agreed. Now, the last little piece that was kind of the essential bit was I had to get permission from my general superior, noting that I am under a vow of obedience. Fortunately, she was very open. So she invited me for an early breakfast, knowing that I am a night person, night owl, and she's a very morning person. Nonetheless, very early in the morning, I had a lovely meal of pancakes, and we came to a wonderful, she affirmed very much my call to go in to study theology more. And for me, it was always a sense that it was there in our tradition, but we had lost sight of it. And this is what I found in my studies. It is there in the very beginning of our tradition, in the early church fathers, as you go through and look with a different lens. It's in the early church fathers, it's in the desert mothers and the desert fathers. And yes, there were a lot of desert mothers, but they were not as literal. They didn't have the same tools of being able to share their knowledge in their way. But nonetheless, the Christian history up until the Middle Ages had a very deep awareness of creation as part of its theology and its spirituality. And I would name Hildegard of Bingen, who talked about the incarnation of the sun was all of the elements of the earth, so all of the earth must be sacred. And we look at St. Francis, who actually had a relational theology of how we have brother sun and sister moon, and how we need to connect in that way. And beautifully, Pope Francis has illustrated this in the introduction of his encyclical Laudato Si. And we
Linda,
see that this, up until the Middle Ages, it was known that we have two scriptures to listen to, the book of nature and the book of scriptures. Those were two valid and essential gifts of scripture. Okay, 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay, I want to tell you about one of the students in our credit program that we had. We do organic gardening fundamentals, and they were at a practice of planting different things in the garden. And one of the students was given some leek seedlings to plant, and they are like threads of hair. And as I walked by her, I saw her holding 5 or 6 of these very gently in her hand, and I just had a feeling it was a special moment. And as she was working with them, I could see that something was happening in her spirit. And at theological reflection that night, she shared about how suddenly she was aware of those delicate leek seedlings that were precarious. And she had a feeling of deep communion as she put her hands into the soil and helped them birth into life. This is the communion that we seek, that we know is possible. And those kinds of understandings are sacred. All creation is sacred. Coming from a farming background, everything needs to be practical, so we have to learn how to live with plants and trees. I really think every university should have a greenhouse attached to it and be growing vegetables for those students together that we would know. I just would close on contemplative prayer. As I learned in my novitiate early, if you think too much that you're doing it, you're going to cut yourself off from God's energy. And this is essential in whatever way we do. I have to say, I have failed often, and I continually have to go back and give myself the grace to go and humbly sit with my God. Listening to some of the criticisms I've had from people, I have something from Pope Francis that I would like to quote. This is in Amazonia Curata, and he talks about prayer. Let us remember, if someone has not learned to stop and admire something beautiful, we should not be surprised if he or she treats everything as an object to be used and abused without scruple. On the other hand, if we enter into communion with the forest, our voices will easily blend with its own and become our prayer. As we rest in the shade of an ancient eucalyptus, our prayer for light joins in the song of the eternal foliage. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. There are a few slides available now that have reference to Sisters of St. Joseph Blue communities.
Yeah, I'll do that.
There are ways to find access to information about setting up community gardens. If you can move forward, Lucy. Faith in the Common Good, who supports the Global Catholic Climate Movement in Canada, has an energy audit that you can download for free, and it walks you through things to look for in your own parish buildings. There is a suggestion to look into bullfrog power, which is a shared energy business, and to take a look at the examples of the new buildings that the Ursuline Sisters in Chatham have put up, and the Sisters of St. Joseph's in Toronto. These are very highly energy efficient buildings, and they've taken a lot of care to make them that way. Next slide, Lucy. I mentioned at the beginning that there are 2 petitions that I would like everyone to participate in. If you are able, and if you agree with them. One is from, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we missed the.
Go 2 slides ahead, Lucy, and I'll come back to this one. Okay. The first is from the Joint Ecological Ministry of in Canada, asking Justin Trudeau to look towards a just transition as we move out of COVID-19. The second one is a petition to the House of Commons, and it is regarding strengthening the abilities of the Canadian Ombudsman for responsible enterprise to support concerns for human rights and environmental rights around the world. 2 very important petitions to take a look at. Now, if you could back up once more, Lucy. One more. This is courses that Linda is offering through the Toronto School of Theology and at her location at Villa St. Joseph. And I would encourage all of you to take a look. If you want to learn more from this very learned teacher that we have here, both Linda and Sister Priscilla. So there's links here to the courses that Linda is offering. And then one more slide in the middle here. This one is a suggestion to consider divestment of your communities, or to ask that of Catholic institutions in your cities. And these congregations have already done so. Their websites are included so that if you have questions on how they went about it, you can contact them. But the Global Catholic Climate Movement also has a lot of information on how to go about divestment, what things you can consider, and there are different levels that you can support in terms of how you want to do that. Now, how much time have we got left? We have only a very few minutes left. There was a good question that came up the chat box. How, for both Linda and Priscilla, how can we support our parish communities to reconnect to the earth? Linda, did you want to start?
Okay. By offering eco-theological programs, by doing, you could do a Laudato Si book study. We have done them here. One of the tragedies of our Catholic Church is that although Pope Francis and many the key leaders in the church and many people on the ground are supporting a new theology and ministry of caring for the earth, there seems to be a gap with the local priesthoods and in the local communities. And we do our best. All of us need to try. Some parishes have got fantastic ecological programs going and have committed themselves, some dioceses have committed themselves to being Laudato Si and following the life, committing to integral ecology. There are many courses online to do with Laudato Si. And educate yourself. Be sure that you know where it comes from in our tradition. And try. And if you fail, keep trying again. And offer whatever you can in your own home. Priscilla?
Yeah, I think I would just add to what you're saying, Linda, that I'd like to highlight your first point in your sharing, and that is if a person thinks of asking a question about how do we help our parishes, then it's already in that person a desire for something to happen in the parish. So trust that sense within you and just search for the resources, as Linda says, to respond to it. Maybe you're the person that's being called to initiate something around ecological justice and or simultaneously something around Indigenous awareness. I think we need to be able to be more consciously putting those two together. And I'd just like to highlight that the Jesuit Forum in Toronto has been working on a resource on relations with Indigenous peoples. Reconciliation with the earth in Canada is not going to happen without reconciliation to Indigenous peoples. And I think the reverse is true as well. And so access that report, or at least that, I think that resource is coming out in September. And the voices of the Indigenous people in that resource will make you very aware of a lot of the ecological justice issues in Canada that are all of our issues.
Thank you. I have another question, and this one is specifically for Sister Priscilla. Can you comment on the link between COVID-19, how it's impacting Indigenous communities in Canada? And this might be more than you can manage in the time we've got left, but how it might be linked to.
I think what I would like to do with that question is simply share an image. And the image would be, I'd like you to imagine 3 glasses. One glass is full, one glass is about half full, and the other one has maybe a quarter of water in it. Now imagine taking a poison, something toxic, putting it in the full glass. It will kill. At least it will kill some, do some damage to the person who's drinking. Take the half glass, put the same amount of poison in it, and you realize how much more powerful its impact. Take the third glass with much less than a quarter of water. Put the poison in that, and it's guaranteed to kill. If you think of the difference in how full the glass is, the amount of service and of resources, particularly in relation to health, but accessibility to health, the conditions, the living conditions of the Indigenous peoples is lacking far more than all of the other groups in Canada. And so the virus is going to have a much more powerful impact. And for that reason, many Indigenous leaders are really trying to protect their communities and keep people out. But the virus will have a much more powerful effect when all of the living situations are adverse to protecting health. I don't know if that is helpful to you.
Yeah, I think that's
but I image the 3 glasses, and just that image speaks to me of the power.
I would like just to add in that viruses don't generally cross species. However, with the major disruption in our environment and natural boundaries that have been crossed, scientists believe transmission between species has now become possible, and that is very evident in the coronavirus. And it's to do with our degradation of the environment. On a positive note, there are signs that if we can make this commitment to a virus to safeguard the human race, let us realize that in April, worldwide, pollution levels fell by 17%. In Canada, they fell by 20%, and in UK, they fell by 30%. Another way is possible. Let us remain committed, and let us believe in the good earth that God gave us.
Let us take up the challenge to conversion that Laudato Si gives to us.
Thank you very much. I see we have 1 minute left on the clock. Lucy, if you can give us the very last slide, and I'll take this minute too Thank you so much, Sister Priscilla and Sister Linda. Your combined wisdoms are an inspiration, and they're wonderful for all of us to take with us. I hope everyone listening found something that they could grab onto to plan activities for themselves and their communities and their parishes in September, the Feast of Creation. If you found things that were revealed to you today helpful and interesting, and you'd like to learn more about the Global Catholic Climate Movement, you can find us on our website. And we are in the process of fundraising for our second year of operation. So if you would like to think about donating and you might have some questions for me, you can reach out to me at any time. My email is on the website, but there's also other ways to connect. You can receive emails and newsletters from us. You can volunteer if you like, and you'll find updates to all kinds of information that is specifically Canadian, generated by ladies like Sister Priscilla and Sister Linda, but many other Canadians who are doing this work. Thank you, everyone. It was a very rich experience to be part of this. I appreciate everyone who's taken time today to join us, and stay well, stay healthy, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.